Thank you. Thank you again. Good evening, everyone, and great to be here. And it is indeed a timely talk as we're coming up for the elections. I think that we all know and we all agree that elections are the cornerstone of democracy, and ensuring every vote counts and every voice is represented from the citizens is very important. So the integrity of the election process, making sure that it's fair, it's transparent and secure, has always been critical. And our interest, at least for this talk, is to see how the evolution of technology and tools and methods may have evolved in order to protect from fraud, from manipulation and error, because all of these criteria, avoiding fraud, avoiding manipulation, and avoiding error, remains as important as ever. But speaking about the technology, let's test the technology by first having our first poll for first election in this talk. And look at this image that we have posted.
We've got a countdown of 10 seconds, so please enter your votes. For those of you who are watching this talk live, please go ahead and enter your vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the results show 25% voting for ancient Post-it notes, 71% saying they represent democracy in action, voting shards, 0 for the heated pottery class option, and 4% giving archaeologists a headache.
Oh, our colleagues, the archaeologists, yes, they do get a headache when they see broken pottery. But it is true. These are represent democracy in action. They're voting shards. This is a collection that comes from ancient Athens. And in ancient Athens, part of the assembly would vote if a public figure was disgraced or became too popular for the good of the democracy, and they would be exiled using this special ostracism election. It's a word that comes from the word ostraka, which means in Greek a shard of pottery. So in such an election, each member of the assembly would be handed a small piece of pottery and be told to scratch down the name of someone who deserved to be exiled. If at least 6,000 people wrote down the same name, the person with the most votes got kicked out of Athens for about 10 years. And this has happened a number of times, and even very famous people in Athens, for example, Themistocles, who was an Athenian military hero, for the Battle of Salamis with the Persians, was ostracized, and he died in exile. So looking at the shards, you probably see those shards up in the middle, the ones that they have a hole, what these are about. Well, similar to in passing laws, the assemblies would also give verdicts to all criminal and civil trials. So instead of a small jury, the Athenian juries contained anywhere between 200 and 5,000 people. So we're talking about a large-scale election in this case. And what would happen is that the Athenian juries would cast their vote using a special kind of ballot involving these stones. And this was one of the early notions of a secret ballot. So each juror will be given two small stones. One would be solid, like the one you see at the bottom left, a round solid one, and another one with a hole in the middle. When it was time to vote, the juror would approach two urns, and he would drop the stone with his actual verdict in the first urn and toss the unused stone in the second urn. No one watching would be able to tell which was which. So this is a first indication of a secret ballot, again, as a way of having an election that it would not be coerced, so everybody would vote according to what they thought was the right thing to do. But I want to fast forward and come to the American experience. And let's talk a little bit about the hand-counted paper ballots. So in 1985, New York introduced what was called the blanket ballot format. This was a change that significantly transformed how Americans voted as we entered the 20th century. This type of new standardized format was revolutionary at the time. For the first time, as you can see from the script, from the image, there was not just a script of one ballot and that you vote. The government distributed ballot presented all candidates' names in a way that was designed to show no favor to any candidate or party, making the election process more impartial and transparent. And before and even during this era, hand-counted paper ballots were commonly used. So voters would just mark their choice, typically with an X next to the candidate's name, and the ballots were counted manually, often right in the precinct where they were cast. However, hand-counted ballots have become rare in the United States today. They're still more commonly used in other countries, particularly those that they have simpler ballots or they are featuring only one race at a time. What we see in the US, we see multiple races for each ballot. So these early methods played a key role in shaping up the way we vote today, where efficiency and security are balanced with a need for accuracy and fairness. The next machine that we see evolving is the lever voting machines. So this machine here in the 1930s was created by a company called the Automatic Voting Machine Corporation and produced lever voting machines, which revolutionized again how Americans cast their votes. This particular machine was probably used to familiarize voters with the new system. And as you can see, it's showing the 1936 presidential election between Franklin Roosevelt and Alf Landon. And at the top, a 1932 election in Philadelphia. So the lever machines were built to make voting faster, more accurate, and more secure. At the time, voting fraud was a significant issue. Election officials would tamper with paper ballots. They would do what is called ballot stuffing boxes, or invalidating votes. And they were using really funny methods about to invalidate votes. They would throw them in the water. So they would essentially invalidate them from counts. The lever machine was the high-tech solution of its era. It really promised voting integrity. However, it wasn't that great in terms of its usability. To vote, individuals put a large handle to close curtains of something that looked like a booth for privacy, and then it would also unlock the machine. Inside, they would use the small levers to select the candidates, and by pulling the main handle, like the one that you see on the top, they would record the vote with a secure odometer-like mechanism, very similar like the odometer that we have in our cars. By the 1940s, most major cities in the US had adopted these machines, although some rural areas still relied on paper ballots. They became very popular, these lever machines, but also they had their challenges. And the challenges were that they were mechanically complex with thousands of moving parts. They required lots of maintenance and skilled technicians. And unfortunately, technicians that could also tamper with them, and they would tamper with them without a trace. So if somebody tampered the machine, it was very difficult to find out if it was been tampered with. So there were also other issues. For example, the machines were also difficult to use for people with physical limitations. And crucially, they did not provide an independent record of each vote. And we will come back to this about how important it is to provide an independent record of each vote. After the 2000 election, again, this started in these types of machines showed up in 1940s, but after the 2000 election, the Helping America Vote Act of 2002 required systems to produce a paper trail for recounts. So lever machines were just phased out. So despite their flaws, these machines represent, again, another technological big step in the evolution of voting technology and the ongoing effort to safeguard election integrity. At least this was the intention. Moving forward, there was another device that was started being used in the 1960s, which relied on punch cards, which had pre-scored sections to record votes. The process was simple. Votes were inserted in a blank card into the machine, and it held the ballot that was lined up with specific punch positions. And to vote, the voter could use a stylus type of a stylus, like a pen, to punch out a small piece of paper called a chad next to the candidate's name. Once the voting was done, the voter would deposit the punched card in a ballot box. And at the end of the day, these cards were read by a machine, a punch card machine at the central election office to tally the results. Punch card systems were once common, particularly for federal elections, but they have been largely phased out. But sometimes we see them in some state and local elections. And the reason why they were phased out was very well-known election, with the issues of the chads, about chads that they were hanging or they were not fully punctured. So there was this kind of inconsistency about what the intent of the voter was, and it was resolved by the Supreme Court. Scan ballots were also first used in the 1960s, and this is a time that this technology was used to scan paper ballots, and they borrowed something from education. It was using exactly the same technology used to score standardized tests. And the ballot itself is marked in a private booth, and the voter uses typically a black pen to darken a circle next to the preferred candidate's name, and they would place the completed ballot in a box. Then with precinct scanning, a scanner sits on top of the ballot box, and the ballot is scanned as it's being deposited. So votes are counted at the end of the election day by running a procedure that the scanner prints out the vote totals associated with a precinct. And then they're moved and they were reported at the election day in order to be counted and appear as they should. But the most controversial machines were the ones that came in the 70s. Of what we have and what you see there is what is called a direct recording electronic voting machine, or DRE. These first started showing up in the 1970s, and were really just an electronic version of the old mechanical lever machines, where would you push a button, and instead of pulling a lever, and votes were recorded electronically rather than mechanically, as we were doing with the odometer style counters that I had mentioned before. Fast forward today, and most DREs are essentially like portable computers. Most of them use touchscreens, they display ballot options and record the votes, though some of them have physical buttons. Some DREs store votes only electronically, but the trend has been toward having a paper trail, especially after some controversies surrounding paperless voting. This debate around DREs really heated up around 2000. Critics, especially in the computer science community, raised concerns about relying solely on an electronic voting without any kind of a paper backup. So this has been a lot of advocacy against it. And the point was that election audits should have paper-based backups. So one big change in recent years is adding what is called a voter verified paper audit trail, voter verified paper audit trail, or VVPAT. This is a paper record that voters can check before finalizing their vote. It's kept as a backup in case of an audit or a recount, so it's an extra layer of security. Because of all this activism and research, we have seen a decline in purely electronic voting systems, and more focus on using DREs that include a paper audit trail. By 2016, around a third of the DREs had this voter verified paper audit trail feature. And just a quick note, even though these printed records look like kind of a receipt, they're not something that you can take home. They stay at the polling place as part of the election security process. So if we look at, to get a sense of, let's get a little bit of a sense of everybody's voting methods and technology with another poll. Can we post the second poll and see what voting machines from those we have covered you have ever used, that the audience has
Yes, it
used?
is live. People should be able to
Yep.
select as many technologies as they have been exposed to or have used in the current poll. We'll let it go for another 15 to 20 seconds. So cast your vote, multiple votes.
And I'm seeing the results. Yeah.
Let it go another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, great. So it's an interesting distribution. We have people we have seen almost all of them. So this is great. So if you look at the two maps that I have up on the screen, the two maps show how the geographic distribution of voting technologies has changed. Well, there are exceptions. On the left map, in 1988, mechanical lever machines were primarily used east of the Mississippi River, the yellow dots, while punch cards dominated the west, and more rural areas used the hand-counted paper. By 2020, the right map, scanned paper dominated the western US, while DREs dominated the east. Counties labeled with mixed in the east use both hand-counted and scanned paper ballots. And only a handful of very small counties continue to use hand-counted ballots. Despite their differences, if we step back and see the progression of these voting methods and technologies throughout the years, and we view it from a historical lens, we see that accuracy, security, and efficiency have always been the design requirements throughout. Some were more successful than others, but it is clear that every iteration has been done to improve some or all of these three elements. When we compare voting methods around the world, it's interesting that the US stands out for its unique interest on automation, both casting and counting of ballots. There are a few reasons for this. The first and the biggest factor is the length of American ballots. In the US, ballots are the longest in the democratic world. This is largely due to our sort of federalist system where elections happen at three levels: federal, state, and local. And on top of that, there is this idea of appointing officials, which means that distrust of appointing officials, which means that many offices are filled by elections instead. And as far as counting the ballots, it seems that we really want the ballots to be counted with an automated method because we want the results quickly. So without automation, counting these lengthy ballots could take months, weeks or months, and the potential for human error is very high. So automation helps us speed the process up. Plus, automating the voting process has been seen as a way to minimize election fraud because we don't have these things like ballot box stuffing or ballot theft. The idea of these systems, they provide us the opportunity to reconcile about who voted and what the outcome was much easier than if we had it in a manual way. So the move towards automation has been driven not only by the need and complexity of the ballot, but also a desire to safeguard the integrity of the process. So following this sort of breakneck speed kind of election history of technologies, there is a big elephant in the room. We shop on the internet, we do our banking on the internet, we take care of our health on the internet, but why aren't we voting on the internet? And the reason is security. And once again, the computer science community has been instrumental in identifying the challenges of internet voting. Two of the most significant issues are the risk of malicious actors intercepting remote votes and denial of service attacks. These are attacks that disrupt the systems receiving those votes. They render them unavailable. The only example that we have that they have been experimenting with internet voting has been Estonia. And the risks, still the verdict is out still of how successful and how well they're doing. But the risks have prevented widespread adoption in the United States. So, but why then are we so concerned about elections, the internet, and cybersecurity? First of all, it is important to distinguish two fundamental parts of election security. The first one is the left-hand side of what you're seeing on the image, which is about election sabotage, as I would call it, or propaganda, which is about using computers, the internet, and social media to engage in misinformation and disinformation, influencing voter opinions, and affecting participation using fake news or misleading ads and conspiracy theories. While all of this takes place in cyberspace, it is very different from the right side, which is about the integrity of the election process from a computing perspective, starting from voter registration, making sure that those are eligible to vote, and then voters casting their ballots. Ballots are collected and counted, votes are tallied, and then results are announced. We focus, and I focus, on the computing side, where the integrity of the election process is what matters at the end, because that's what the votes that they are being cast. So today, elections are conducted using computers, and voter registration is stored in computerized databases. Voting occurs in electronic machines that they often, and we'll see, they provide paper ballots, and vote tabulation and reporting are all managed through computers. So the computing element is very strong in this process. So this offers many benefits, but it also means that elections now face some of the same cybersecurity vulnerabilities inherent in all computer systems. So we've look at this we look the election process in a way that it's about systems and processes and how we can secure them from a cybersecurity lens and framework. So this is going to be a little bit of a letdown for some of you, but the CIA triad that I mentioned here, it's not about spies, it's not about espionage or covert operations. It is an acronym, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, of one of the fundamental cybersecurity frameworks for understanding and managing security in various contexts, including elections. So how do these three elements of cybersecurity would apply to elections? First, we have confidentiality. In elections, this means keeping sensitive information, voter data, ballots, personal details, private and protected from unauthorized access. If confidentiality is compromised, it could lead to things like voter intimidation or even fraud, and it would seriously undermine the trust of the election process. Next, there is integrity. This ensures that the election data and results are accurate and haven't been tampered with. It's about making sure that every vote is counted correctly and that no unauthorized changes are made to the ballots or records. If the integrity of an election is compromised, it could result in false outcomes, such as manipulated vote totals. It would damage the legitimacy of the entire election, and so on and so forth. And finally, availability. This is all about ensuring about election systems like the voting machines, the systems that count the votes, and the systems that report the votes are up and running when they're needed, especially on election day. If there's a system outage or an attack that prevents people from voting, it could really disrupt the whole election process. So maintaining availability is critical to ensuring a smooth and fair election. So what are usually the election threats? Well, whether we're talking about voting machines or voter registration database or tabulation systems, they are all possible hacking targets. Why? Because they are computers and they operate on networks. They don't have some magical security technology that the rest of the world doesn't know about. So the same way we have computers and devices that could potentially be targets of an attack, they can also be attacked with the intention to violate their integrity. And in election computers, that means altering votes. Now, it's not just about altering the vote itself. Sometimes the goal is to cause widespread system failures or just to create distrust in the system. And there's another challenge with voting security. It's the requirement for a secret ballot. We have to keep the system that tracks who can vote completely separate from the system that collects and counts the votes. This makes things really tricky because it limits the use of advanced security systems like those that we use in online banking and other high-value applications. If we didn't have to keep the votes anonymous and we could provide receipts of not just that we voted, but who we voted for, it would be a lot easier to secure the voting process. So if everyone could verify that their vote was counted correctly, it would be much simpler. So as you can see on the type of receipt that we have from this nice place in Chicago, if we could have a receipt for elections like the fake one that I have on the right, then we could have definitely at some point in 2034, if I voted, we would know not only that I voted and my vote was counted, but I also whom I voted for. So I could really reconcile what the vote would be. The problem is that this brings a lot of other issues. Before the secret ballot, the US faced huge problems with voter coercion and vote buying. So this is the reason why we can only go so far whenever we are recording information about the votes, which is, did you vote, yes or no? No more information beyond that. So what is the takeaway here? That we have to accept that our voting systems need to be protected and to be resilient against certain threats. And for parts of the process, that means that going back to the basics, using paper, which is as we have done. But it's not all gloom and doom. I mentioned before that these target voting systems are like our computers, but particularly the voting machines and the voting tabulation systems are very simple machines. Each one is a one-use type of machine. This means that they're designed to do just one thing, either collecting votes or counting votes. So they each run just one software program. So contrast that with any of your laptops or computers at home that run tens of different software programs, each software developed by a different company, and each one having its own possible vulnerabilities. The fact that these election machines are single function machines reduces what we call in cybersecurity the attack vector or the attack surface, which is the number of possible points hackers have to try and exploit the system, making those that they're sort of playing defense easier to defend a system like this. So let's look at the interaction of election and voting systems, albeit in a very generalized and simplified view. So what we see here is the flow of what we typically see whenever we are thinking about the election process. And here you see that we have ways that we can register as for voting. It either comes from the DMV, you check a box and the DMV sends your information to the voter registration system. There are online voter registration systems that they're growing more, or you can do it at the US Postal Service. The idea of the voter registration system that is within the blue area is that the voter registration system there has the authoritative answer of what we are keeping for our voter rolls. And this is important. And this is important because it is possible that because people move, because people change residencies, that this is always reconciled and it is the latest one. So if we look at this process, what we do and we look at the different aspects of them, after we have the voter registration system, at the time of the elections, we go to a polling site where usually volunteers that they are at the polling site, they're using what they're called e-poll books. And these poll books, they have been updated from the voter registration system. Then we vote using whatever voting system is deployed. And then the results are being tallied to a reporting system and then sent out to the statewide election reporting system. Whenever we are trying to assess the risks in a kind of a system like this, we break down the parts and we try to assess what is the probability of an attack and also what could possibly be the impact of it. And the way that we do this is by this type of a segmentation. So let's start with a voter registration system. A voter registration system is a database that keeps track of who's allowed to vote in a certain area. It makes sure that only eligible people, depending on age and citizenship, are able to vote. Voters provide, they sign up, they give their name, address, and other details. And this is checked on election day to confirm that a person can vote. After so the way that the US states, there's no conformity in this. They have three primary approaches whenever they are building these systems. One is a top-down system where they maintain a central authoritative database statewide. There's another mechanism, there's another design, a bottom-up, where bottom-up databases have local jurisdictions. They maintain their authoritative registration databases, which are compiled into the statewide database. Hybrid systems that give the local offices the discretion to maintain locally or rely on the statewide database. So the key here is the idea that there is an authoritative database. And whatever online registration system may have been used, one that usually is not network accessible, is storing for backups of these registration systems. After the 2016 US presidential election, people started paying a lot of more attention to the security of the voter registration databases. And the reason was that the US intelligence agencies confirmed the Russian hackers targeted all 50 states' voter systems, and they actually managed to break into 2, including Illinois. So from Illinois, they stole 76,000 registration records, name, address, social security, etc., before getting caught. While there is no evidence that they changed any voter data on the system, this really highlights how important it is to secure those records against tampering. So, plus there's always the risk that an attack could prevent election officials from accessing the voter database on election day, which would cause many big problems. Having said this, those breaches did not affect the election results since the loss of registration could be easily remediated by either re-registration the same day and vote, or using backups. But since then, really the weight of the federal, state, and local agencies have gotten behind securing these systems, and they started treating election system as critical infrastructure, very similar to what we treat water plants and so on and so forth. So, and a lot of support and resources were provided, I think somewhere in the order of $800 million. This effort and this research expenditure has fortified environments that are significantly better secured and resilient. And I can attest to this because with my colleague, Dr. Jim, in 2018, we were invited and joined a team of experts from Homeland Security and law enforcement officers and county election officials. There was effectively a risk assessment, a security hardening exercise here in Frederick. Obviously, I can't discuss details, but it was one of the most thorough 360-degree security review of every possible system, device, and all access, data workflow process, custody protocol of systems ballots, and even building safety down to the blueprints. And you could tell that everything was sort of secured as much as it could possibly get secured. And this is what was happening all across the country. Companies as well that build and sell equipment that they're related to elections also are operating under much stronger security protocols. And on top of that, there is a lot of vigilance of cybersecurity organizations at the federal government and the military level that play a significant role in cyber defense to protect these infrastructures. So the infrastructures have improved dramatically since 2016. And I also want to dispel some common misconception about the reliability of voting by mail and using drop boxes. The US has been mailing ballots for over 150 years, and there are plenty of security measures in place, including now cameras watching drop boxes and teams from both parties, making sure everything is handled properly. And one of the states that have a lot of history in this type of mail-in voting is Oregon. And it's really a pioneer state in the area. They have sent out more than 100 million mail-in ballots since 2000 for the last 24 years. And they have documented only about a dozen cases of attempted proven fraud. That is about 0.501% of all votes cast. So in fact, studies through the years show that voter fraud with mail-in ballots is so rare that you're more likely to get struck by lightning than seeing that kind of fraud ever happen. Another misconception is one about non-eligible citizens and non-citizens voting. This is practically non-existent. There are several studies and state-led investigations that have shown that non-citizen voting in federal and statewide elections virtually never happens. And that's no surprise. It's illegal, and if a non-citizen intentionally registers or votes in one of these elections, they will face severe fines, prison, and deportation. So, they have a lot to lose for just one vote out of 160 million votes in the United States. Further, it's not hard to identify non-citizen voting because they would have to do it with their own names. So in several states in recent years, including Michigan, Ohio, Florida, Iowa, state election officials have really put a lot of effort in investigative resources to finding fraudulent registrations and never finding more than a handful, mostly registrations, out of tens of millions of votes. And in some cases, they're just honest attempts. They're in the DMV, a non-citizen is getting a driver's license, and they're clicking that, yes, I want to be registered to vote, but of course they cannot do it. So political and these all of these, who can vote, political parties and private citizens have access to these roles, to the roles that they register to. So there too, you can if anybody's voting and if they are citizens or non-citizens. So that was a little bit of a side part, but it's related to the eligibility and voter registration. In voter check-in, once we have the poll books, in many states, there are poll workers that they're using these tablet-like electronic poll books rather than paper ones to verify voters. Typically, when they are deployed, they're deployed in a very restrictive way. They're updated to hold only a local copy of only a subset of voters for the specific precinct, and it's a process that requires technically a physical connection and a transfer from the authoritative database. So it does not happen over the internet. And they also have locking mechanisms in case they are stolen. Voting machines, there are two broad types of electronic voting machines that we use today. It's the optical scan ballot readers and record paper ballots filled by the voters, and then direct DRE machines that do not count but generate a paper record. So in the former case, voters fill out paper ballots by hand, and in the latter case, voters make selections on a touchscreen. The machine prints a paper ballot to review before casting their vote. Nationwide, for this coming election, it is expected that 98% of all votes to be cast will be on paper versus 93% of votes 4 years ago. Counties in all but 2 states, and I believe it's Texas and Louisiana, have moved to voting systems with paper trail, and their remaining plan to transition is very soon, but I don't think they're going to make it by November. So all the swing states that are most likely to determine the winner of the upcoming election, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all of them use voting systems with paper records. I also want to dispel a common misconception about the accuracy of voting systems. Our election system has a robust set of safeguards to prevent fraudulent ballots from being accepted and to ensure that votes are accurately counted. While the specifics really vary depending on where you are in terms of the state, election officials across the board conduct rigorous testing and certification both before and after the election. So this includes federal, state, local, just not only federal and presidential elections. And all of the equipment is tested with pre-election checks, during procurement, post-election audits, and so on, et cetera, and so on and so forth. So there are audits that compare the paper records to the machine counts to ensure that everything adds up. So in the same way, all of us balance our checkbooks or bank accounts and we cannot spend more than we have. It's exactly the same type of reconciliation between multiple sources, number of votes cast against the registration system and auditing procedures. So it's obvious if something is going on. And the final stage is the vote tallying and reporting. And the transfer of the tallies are performed via secure encrypted communication or physically. So the statewide election reporting systems can vary as to how they are configured. It is often the case that the system receiving the results is isolated and the data is secured, so a copy of the results is posted to internet accessible systems the night of the election. We have an insatiable kind of appetite to see the election results as quickly as possible, and these systems are critical because of these. These internet accessible systems are targets often of denial of service attacks. So they use certain techniques and protections to remain available to the public. So in many cases, whenever we're talking about these systems, we want to look at them in terms of what they mean from a cybersecurity risk assessment perspective. And I'm just giving this as an example of how we typically conduct a risk assessment. And the way that we do it is we cut up the systems and what are the different ones that they are accessible, and they have a probability, and we define a probability of attack. And this probability of attack allows us to focus the controls of what it is that we are interested in protecting. I think we have a poll, don't we, Dean Bolton? There we are. So looking at the previous slide, what do you think is the weakest link in prior elections?
Votes are rolling in. We're going to let it go another 15 seconds. So enter your vote on this final poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Great. Well, it's truly heartwarming seeing that 8 of our participants think that it's all of the above, because this is exactly the mindset of every cybersecurity professional, treating all of the above with a lot of paranoia that all of them are vulnerable. But then the next step is to go deeper and try to find out which ones are really going to need much more protection because they are more vulnerable. And online voter registration systems are very vulnerable indeed. The voter registration system is also subject. E-poll books, not as much. The voting systems, we talked about them, and the tallying and reporting and statewide reporting systems, they're showing up a lot because they are the prime candidates of they're very visible. They're visible to almost everybody. So if we have this kind of example risk assessment, we see that the voter registration systems, the probability is probably medium in terms of an attack. And I'm saying medium because it's not the only way that we register voters. We register voters with additional systems. We do them through the DMV, or we do it through the U.S. Postal Service, and so on and so forth. And the impact is low because if we have the authoritative databases, we can always fall back, or we have methods that allow the voters to show up, register the same day, and prove who they are and vote. And again, as you can see, in red is the state election reporting system, because it's very high because they're very susceptible to denial of service attacks. These are attacks that they only care about bringing the system down. That's the intent. The voting systems, they have an asterisk because only the probability of attack is low only if we have paperless, because we don't have paperless voting. So we need paper in order for the probability to be low and the impact to be also low. So this is an example of the risk assessment exercise that we go through. Anyone who votes in Maryland, meet probably who you're going to be dealing with, and it's the DS200 digital scanner, I believe. That's the model. And the way that it works, it captures the image as it scans and counts its ballot. And it has a ballot compartment that is secure, and the voted ballots drop into here. So there is a record, and it's done with paper, and you have seen it. I hope that I covered most of the topics that I wanted to cover. I would urge anybody to vote with confidence, and I am open for any questions.
And questions there are. We have quite an eclectic audience here tonight. We have a range of questions that have been entered from folks who clearly have a more technical background to folks who are coming at this from less of a technical background. So I'm going to kick it off with a question that was entered into the chat. Why Estonia? Why was Estonia the testing ground for internet voting? Is it something about their geography, technology, internet connectivity, or something else?
Estonia is a very interesting country, and the reason why they were first, they had a government shift towards digital transformation. And this meant that everything that they had inherited from, uh, the old world, pre-Soviet Union, and so on and so forth, all that bureaucracy of that era, they collectively decided that they're going to have a digital transformation and everything will be conducted electronically and efficiently. So I dare to say it was cultural, and it was also a risk that they decided to take on. And they are sort of a model country of digital transformation. Um, and it seems to have worked for them. They have very limited bureaucracy, but I think the verdict is still out as far as what is the susceptibility of attacks in terms of their voting integrity.
Thank you. Next question entered was, and this was entered in a variety of ways, but I think I can distill it to basically this. In your professional view, do you think the widespread distrust of elections in this country should be blamed more on social media misuse or cybersecurity?
I think the greatest effect is social media misuse because of the reach. Um, I mean, if I were to look at it historically, I think the first election that it was very highly contested with the Chads, which was an issue back in what was it 2000 if I or so if I remember correctly. Um, that was an issue that started sort of questioning the integrity of elections. But then it escalated as the evolution of methods were changing. That the more you have technology, the more you start saying, well, it's a computer, therefore it cannot be 100% secure. And under this mindset, that's sort of the share of computing has in the distrust. So I would say that mostly it has been the social media and this idea of news that they are not supported by evidence, or these are usually the ones that they have been having the most impact.
All right. Time still for a couple more questions. This next one is a bit more technical in nature, so you may
Mhm,
need to explain some of the terms, Dr. Dimitoglou.
mhm,
Why haven't blockchain technologies been widely adopted to enhance election security and transparency,
mhm.
despite their potential for creating immutable and decentralized voting records?
So blockchain technology for others that they don't know anything about it is the idea that it works like a ledger that you cannot change. So you put an entry into this ledger, and I'm being very simplistic about it. You put an entry in the ledger, and it cannot be changed, it cannot be altered, and it's very secure. The problem that blockchain has is that it has very big problems with performance and speed. It takes a very long time whenever somebody is adding an entry to be able to be propagated to all the parts of the blockchain. So imagine that you have a day of an election and you have 160 million people making 160 million transactions and having to distribute all of them at the same time. So there is a technical aspect that is not necessarily resolved, but people are looking at blockchain. Um, the second issue with blockchain is, for all intents and purposes, would be internet voting. So this means that somebody who is sitting at their home, they will have to log in somewhere in order to be able to access the blockchain, or locally they'll have to do it. I mean, there are different ways of doing it. So these need to be protected as well. So and then it's not an end-to-end solution that right now is viable, but it doesn't mean that it may not be in the future. It may be that's where we end up going.
I think we'll have time for two more questions. This next one is, can you speak a bit more generally to your 2018 experience with risk assessment in Frederick. Was this voting project something that is standardized before elections? And is it occurring throughout the state?
Yes, and I will start backward. This is a standard operating procedure, as far as I know, that it happens before every election. And the interesting part about this, to me at least, when we engaged in this type of assessment, it was that we were looking at things that would be remotely related to the actual part of the elections. I mean, we were talking about we were assessing everything from the computers that the election officials were using for at their office that has nothing to do, because everything is related, everything might be in similar networks, etc. We looked at the little poll books. We sort of tried to do assessments in a way that it covered almost all possible the gamut of things that could go wrong, from a hacking attempt, a physical security attack, a network attack, if it were to be possible. I'll give you an example that I can share with. The way that some of these poll books, from what I recall, would be updated, they will have to be sitting at a specific base that it has what is called a checksum, a specific number. So you cannot update those just by connecting them to anything. They have to be connected to a specific machine. So in order to alter them, somebody has to be physically there in order to put the poll book into that base and then try to alter the data. So we saw a lot of things that we didn't necessarily know, and we found them very interesting. And we also saw that this is a very thorough examination. And it happens, to my understanding, it's this kind of attestation that goes on all the time.
And the last question, based on your research, where would you say the misconception regarding illegal immigrants voting came from? Is this a concern starting with the 2016 or 2020 elections, or before?
I think there has been a rise after the 2016 election, but I think one of the sort of the issues that I have seen, the idea that we can register and vote in multiple places. We can register at the MVA, we can register in an online registration, we have all this plurality of votes. I think this gives us the idea that anybody can vote anytime, as many times, and they can be anybody they want to, but it's not true. It's not true, because in order to register, you need to provide evidence for it. And part of the research, just to make a point that is not only about non-residents, there is a handful of examples that felons have been caught trying to register and trying to vote. And the reason is that they did not know that whatever felony charge they may have encountered was forbidding them to vote in the elections. So the non-citizens and the immigrants, I think it has definitely been blown out of proportion, because there is no evidence that we see that this is anything that is going on. But I think it's more on the social media and the left side of my slide, rather than a computing and cybersecurity issue in this case. The computing aspect has enough reconciliations and proofs that if an attempt is made, it's caught, and nevertheless it's not being tried anyway.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. Dimitoglou for this very timely, very informative talk. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us for this episode of Hood Talks. We hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you.